Hello, everyone, and we're back again. And today we are going to be talking about measuring success. Now, this is really important because I don't know how you measure success, but a lot of people, how they measure it is by comparing themselves against other people. Or they're waiting. Whenever I say to people, how do you know how well you're doing? They go, well, because someone tells me. Now, don't get me wrong, if someone's tutoring you or supervising you, obviously you want to be listening to them about your progress. But that is also like their opinion, but that's valid. But what we realize is we want to measure our own success. And the reason is because, excuse me, we have often this future vision of ourselves, but then we beat ourselves up for not getting there, for not being there already. And we're constantly doing that. And it can make us feel really depleted. And we're comparing ourselves against others, against people. We're comparing our beginning against other people's middle and end. And actually, we don't even have a full picture of what it's actually like for them, do we? Because we think everyone's got it together. But, those people are still feeling anxiety and fears and frustrations and worrying what other people think. Because we don't see that, we don't take that into account. So, I want to show you how to measure your own success, which will help you increase your motivation. Now, first thing you want to do is this is where you are now. Okay. What you want to do is have a vision of where you want to be. Now, don't hold yourself to this, as in, like, if you don't get there, that you're going to punish yourself, because what this is like a star. I heard this, I can't remember in what book I heard this, but they said your future vision of where you want to be is like a star to guide, not a shore to reach. And the reason is because this is like a horizon line, this always goes. So think of the future vision of yourself as a direction, not a destination. Be like if we went right, we're going to walk south, we set the compass to south, we don't ever reach south. We reach lots of destinations along the way, but south is the direction we're walking along. And that's what our future self is. It's a direction and it gets us moving in the direction where we want to go. And we can go back to the last video where we talked about our values and all our roles. This future self is designed all around that. And it gets us moving and taking action. And what we can do is we can use this future self as advice and feedback. And I'll explain more about this in a minute. But basically, when things don't go as planned and we're feeling a bit low and we're beating ourselves up, we can go to this future self who is already where we want to be and ask them their advice about what they would tell us because it makes it a very, very different journey. Now, what we want to do as we walk along this path, there's going to be steps. But what we do is as we walk along, and this present becomes now our past, and this is now our new present, we start still comparing ourselves against this. And there's a great book by Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy called The Gap and the Gain. And they call this the gap. So we're always thinking of where we're not. And like, oh, when and we're looking at other people, oh, when I'm as good as them, then I'll be happy. When I know this, then I'll be happy. And then we get there, we know all that, and then we want to know something else and we're still not happy. And what this is the difference between success and fulfillment. I've seen people that are so successful no fulfillment because they're always measuring themselves against this part, against the gap. So, what we want to do is, as we're moving along, we want to then stop and look back. And this bit, Dan Sullivan and Dr. Benjamin Hardy refer to it as the gain. If you want to read their book, it's just called The Gap and the Gain. It's a great book. But this is the benefits, the wins, whatever you like to call it. And we want to be celebrating these because the brain will not want to do it. Okay. The reason we got actively do it is because the brain won't want to celebrate these wins. And the reason is because when you, when we have a sort of future, we think, oh, we really want to do this. Like for me, like I want to be a cop. And it was like a dream of mine. But then I became a cop it became normal because as human beings, our brain is very adaptive. So we adapt to our new surroundings very easily. And the simple reason for that is because we're survival machines. And you imagine if we were totally like, oh wow, this is amazing. Look at this is great, this new environment. We in our primitive days, we'd have been eaten by something. So we adapt very quickly. This is our new norm, right? We're happy with this, and then our brain focuses on the outside world because that's where all the danger is. But the problem is now when we're not really faced with those dangers, we become very unfulfilled because we chase something that we always want, we got it, and then we just want the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. We never see how far we've come. So the simple way is to measure your progress backwards. And you can do this now, wherever you are, however long you've been in. You think of that day when you decided you were going to be a special. And because you might be looking now and thinking, oh, I don't know enough. I'm not good enough. That's because you're in the gap. But when you look and go, how much do I know? Let's see what I've learnt. What have I learnt? What are my wins? What have I gained? What knowledge have I gained? If you've made mistakes, that's still a gain because you've learned something from it. You're measuring your wins. And then what you'll see is you'll go, actually, I've achieved loads. So and the further you do this back, it's quite amazing how it makes you feel. Because I was, I sometimes think 17 and a half years ago when I joined the police, I remember walking around the galleries, I think it was, in uniform with, and I just thought I stood out. People, I feared people coming up, talking to me. I remember the first time I dealt with a shoplifter and I had a receipt to exhibit. I didn't know what to do with it. And now I've dealt with complex investigations with 100 subjects. I work on child protection, but that becomes the norm. It just becomes what you think you've always been like, but it's not. So you want to keep measuring back, keep measuring back, keep measuring back. And what you'll find is that builds the motivation to move forward. And as you take these steps, what will determine whether you move forward or stay as you are or go backwards is how you frame it. So no matter whatever happens, if you take a step and you start judging yourself and beating yourself up, say you've made a mistake at work, you take a step, you try something, you don't get it right, something goes wrong. If you're judging yourself, you're just going to stay here. But what we want to do is go to this future self and go, what would they make that step mean? Every time I ask this people, answer now, answer now. If you think of a mistake you've made or something that's happened, and you go, what would my future self make that mean? It's always the same. It's just part of the journey. Forgive yourself, be kind to yourself, just move on. Take the learning and move on. It's part of the journey. And that's why this future self is so good because we can use that to move us forward. Because often what we do is we talk to ourselves from our present self, which is lacking, it wants to be further on, and it's somehow thinking that this step is making us stay behind, but it's not. It's actually part of the process, and we just haven't seen it yet. And this is why it leads us to this next thing. It's so important to zoom out because what we're doing is we got to zoom in when we're doing the work. We're zoomed in and we're engaged. But then we want to zoom out and look at these gains and look at what this all means. Because I can tell you now, I've made some mistakes in the past where in the moment I thought this is really not good, but actually it's led me down great paths. Or I've learned so much from it. I remember being stood in court and realized I missed some billing off of unused material because I didn't really know what I was doing with it. And I remember stood in the box and they asked me a question. I went, oh, I got the billing in my bag. And they went, what? We don't know. So I was literally, the attention was drawn to it whilst I was in the box. And I could feel I could feel everything going, oh, no. But now I can see that in the context of, I've lived the future now and I can see it all in context. I've never forgotten that again. And I've used that to help other people who've made mistakes. It's not that bad. Things happen and actually, you can move on from them. So zooming out is really good. And when you're in those places where you feel like it's not going great, realize that this is just a dot that you haven't joined up yet. You don't know where that's going to take you. So you want to zoom in when you're doing the work, zoom out to get context and start measuring those gains backwards. Um, yeah, and we talked about that, measuring back, not comparing, and focusing on marginal gains. What I mean by that is these steps are small, but they accumulate. And then the change feels like it's like that. But it's all those tiny little steps that have led to it. And in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, he talks about this great analogy of an ice cube. And he says, like, if you've got an ice cube and pull it out of the freezer and you start notching up that temperature, nothing happens. Put it to 1 degree, nothing, 2 degrees, nothing, 3 degrees. And you keep putting up a degree at a time and nothing changes. Then suddenly you might go 12 to 13, you go 12 degrees, nothing's happened, 13 degrees, it starts melting. But it's not that 1 degree that's melted it, it's the accumulation of all those things. But we suddenly don't see like the spike until we're here. We've taken all these steps. So just realize that. You are like the ice cube. You are going to get that change you want, but it takes all those accumulative steps to get it. And it will feel like there's not much change. It will feel like things are hard, but keep measuring back, seeing how much you've learned. Your brain will not want to pick out the gap, the gains. It will want to be in the gap, but you just train it to see it. And then all of a sudden, everything will click in and you'll see that massive growth. And then when you want to grow again, you've got to just do the same again. But it's focusing on the little wins, the marginal gains, and be happy with that. Don't, because I tell you now, if you want to be further on than you want to be somewhere other than where you are, A, you're not going to be happy because that's all happiness. That's all happiness is just the absence of desire. If you don't desire something else, then you're happy. But of course, we're humans and we desire things. We want other things. So we have desire in our life, which is why we're not actually designed to be happy all the time. I hope that makes sense. We go, I want something else. Well, once I'm desiring something I haven't got, that sense of fulfillment, happiness is going to go. But that's normal when I'm on the route to getting something. But I can measure back, measure my gains, and it can feel really good. And then when I get the thing, oh, it's great, I got it. But actually, it's those marginal gains that I'm celebrating, and along the way, I'm feeling better about it. And the happiness will come and it will go. And and the last thing I want to talk about here is the strategic byproducts. A strategic byproduct is a byproduct that you didn't anticipate. But actually, when you identify it, it can have a real advantage. So you might have your future vision might be, I don't know, could be anything, couldn't it? Like say mine, if I look at mine, my goal was to be in the police, to be a detective. Now, I've reached that goal, but actually, the strategic byproduct was the type of person I became along the way. Better, I can speak to people. I can speak to people about any type of difficult situation. Um, I've just got so much experience along the way, and that I've used in other areas of my life. I use that in my coaching. That's not something I ever anticipated when I wanted to set out to be a detective, but it's got massive benefits. So notice that when you have these goals, this future vision, these goals that you're heading towards, actually, what are the strategic byproducts? And that really fits in with those gains. And identify and go, well, I'm actually really better at speaking to people now. I've learned this. I can apply that here. And the reason this is good is because if you've got a goal and you don't reach it, you're going to have strategic byproducts. You're going to have benefits and things you've learned along the way that is going to benefit you in other areas of your life. And it is such a key. And then what you can do is you can start really stretching your goals. So I don't know for in the specials what your aims, what your goals are, even if you look in your private life, like going for promotion. You go for a promotion and you don't get it. Strategic byproduct is you might be really good at interviews. I had this when I was going for jobs, and I go for a job and not get it. But actually, I'd spoken to someone then afterwards who told me all about how to do great interviews, which then I then used in other interviews coming up. So notice the strategic byproducts. Okay. So to summarize that, as you move through, use your future self as a starter guide and for advice and feedback. Don't catch yourself when you're in this gap. and measure your success backwards. See where you've come. Just keep zooming in and out. All right. And this is a game changer for me because I do this on big things and small things. When I'm doing like a case file, I'm looking when my brain's gone, I'm no further forward and I come across obstacles. I can always see I'm further ahead. And you may be like, just say something that came up in the conference was um, people saying, well, I go to a domestic, say, I use that as an example. You go to a domestic, you might go to one, then it might be a few weeks before you go to another one, and you feel like you're on the back foot. If you go back to our first video, that's all thoughts. I'm on the back foot. I'm not as experienced. It's not going as quickly as I want. Whereas actually, if you look what you've gained, the moment you've gone to that, you will be further forward than when you hadn't gone to one. And it's measuring those marginal gains and running your race and not comparing yourself against someone else. That's really the killer. And the last thing I want to just cover quickly is motivation. Okay. We've talked about in the last one, knowing your why. It's really key because the reason it's key is because we can't rely on motivation all the time. People always say, I'm going to do it when I'm motivated. But motivation comes from dopamine. Motivation is, and for those that you don't know what dopamine does, everyone thinks that dopamine is released when we get a reward. So when we get something, and it is, but it's also released in anticipation of the reward. And it's when it's novel, when it's new. So how many of you have done something like when you first joined and you might be really motivated, this is all brilliant and exciting, and then you do the same thing over and over again, and it becomes normal, like what we talked about, the brain being adaptive. And the reason that is because dopamine did not evolve to get more of one thing. Because otherwise, you imagine if we found some berries and we just were getting the same amount of pleasure from it all the time, we wouldn't then go foraging looking for anything else. So dopamine, when we get to pleasure, it down regulates. So things become normal. So those things that we once found motivating, when we do it over and over again, it's now not motivating anymore. You might go for a run one morning, go, yes, this is brilliant. And the next morning, oh, not so much. So we can't really rely on motivation. What we rely on is commitment. Commitment is key. And it's really about knowing your why. That's your commitment. Actually committing, I'm doing this. And when you don't feel like doing it or it's hard, going, why am I doing this? And reconnecting with that why. And it makes such a difference. And you realize your commitment gets you to the line, gets you started, and motivation may come as you're going. But if you're waiting for motivation, you won't get so much experience and you won't be doing the things that are actually going to make your life easier. And work in sprints. If you've got in the first video, if you remember, we talked about that thought, I've got to work twice as hard to prove myself. If you've got that belief, you're probably not taking breaks. You're probably exhausted. But I've learned that when you work in sprints, you get really intensely focused on something and then you stop and you rest. And you apply this to all areas of your life. Because I mentioned this before, burnout doesn't come from the intensity of the energy you're expending. It's actually the length of time that you do that for without a rest. Because you think everything we're doing is we're expending energy, and actually we need to be able to let that all build up. And you think you've got your physical energy, your emotional energy, your mental energy, and also your spiritual energy. That's like your values and your meaning and your purpose. That's really key. So you want to work in sprints. And by sprints, I don't mean, I was chatting to someone the other day and they go, yeah, I work in sprints. I work 4 days a week, flat out, no breaks. And then I crash at the weekend and have a rest. That's not sprints. That's running a marathon as a sprint, not trying to sprint a marathon and then collapsing. Sprints is where you work in 90-minute intervals. And that can be more tricky and uniform, but there is times when you can come away and you can rest. It's about actually, if you've been working and you've been out and you've been doing your special in, then actually it's about then taking a break. Because if you're going from one to the other, it may not be sustainable for you. When you work in sprints, it helps keep the motivation because you're totally engaged, and then you come away and you're totally disengaged because you need to be able to disengage. And the other benefit of this, when I was thinking, no, it's not for me, is when you learn something, it's not when you're actually doing it that the brain makes the connections. It's when you pull away and you rest. Just like when you're training, if you lift a weight and you break the fibers of the muscles. And then what happens? You then rest, and then the muscle then actually mends and it gets bigger, it gets stronger. If you trained that muscle every day just as hard, it would actually get weaker because you keep breaking the fibers. And it's the same with us, with our emotional and our mental and our spiritual energy. We need to work in sprints. And that ties in, you've got to rest. I went years trying not to rest, and actually it made me quite ill. And I realize now the rest is really important. Now, what stops people resting is the fear of judgment of others, those beliefs, those thoughts that we talked about in the first video. But when you realize someone's opinion is only going to harm you when you adopt it, when you let it in, it doesn't have to. And resting is really, really key. And people go, well, I can't. What will other people think of me if I'm resting? But I see so many people that don't rest, but then what they're doing is they're not really engaged when they're doing their work. Because if you work in sprints and you rest, you'll be fully engaged and you'll get more done and you'll learn quicker. If you work in marathons and you don't rest, you're not going to take so much in, and your learning is that you could do more and get less out. And the last thing I'd say is just be you. I think this is the key, is the world doesn't need, the police doesn't need another Johnny Bevan. It doesn't, it just doesn't need clones of people. It needs you to bring your uniqueness to this job. And I know sometimes that can be really hard because we worry what other people think of us. But everyone's worrying what we think. Everyone's worrying what people think of them. So when you think, if you walk into a room, no one's really thinking about you because they're worrying what other people are thinking of them. So realize that actually just being able to be you is the answer. I know when I go to jobs sometimes, I think I have this thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I've not done this before. I go, do you know what? I'm just going to do it my way. I'm just going to be me. And I'll learn from it. I'll reflect on it, measure those gains, deal with any failures that come along. But if you're being you, it's always, it feels just that little bit easier. In fact, it feels a lot easier because when you're doing it, when you're not being you and you're doing something new, that is really draining. So just be you. And if you hear this and you want to come and have a chat, you want to talk through anything else a little bit sort of deeper, please, I'll put the details in the notes. Just get in touch, come and have a conversation. And I'm at Kennisstill House at the moment, at the time of recording this, which is 9th of December 24. I'm at Kennisstill House on the child protection team. Please feel free just to reach out. But good luck with everything, and I'll speak to you later. Bye bye.